The latest episode of Critical Role is filled with these tiny nuances in plot threads that Matt is setting up for something big in the future. So let's get into this episode, and forgive me if I meander a little bit, but there's a lot of interweaving threads here. The episode begins with the ride to the ball, and we get, in normal Critical Role fashion, complete chaos when the group is trying to plan something. And it foreshadows the rest of the episode because despite their best laid plans, I wouldn't say best, but quote-unquote plans, everything goes to shit eventually. The arrival at the ball is pretty normal, but everyone knows Lord Esteros. And I definitely liked seeing how Lord Esteros is in public, because he's definitely an imposing figure, but everyone watching, staring at him, and of course the rumors that he killed his former master just all started to swirl around Lord E this episode. I always find it interesting when Matt takes one of our beloved NPC characters and drops them into a situation that they're not used to. Best example of this is in Campaign 2 with the Ruby of the Sea. But then we begin to see in the ball other NPCs that we recognize. Ella Loomis and Oshad are there, and I wish the party talked to them at some point this episode, but let bygones be bygones. Also, Gianna Hexam is present, and I personally love the relationship that Matt and Taliesin have set up between Gianna and Ashton. And of course, Gavis Aranda is here, the voice of the Chandri Quorum, and eventually Armand Treshy appears with someone else. This individual was a half-elf in her mid-20s, very pale skin, like Duggar, long gray dress, immediately breaks off, and this is Emoth Cade. And during her first introduction, I really got the sense of Matt describing not this shy person, but like a predator stalking its prey. And I think later on in the episode, we definitely do get that reveal. She goes off and begins waiting for something, which we would later learn to be Cyrus, Dorian's brother. But there are still more NPCs that we have to talk about. Paragon's Call enters this ball, and the 5 of them look rough. The most important member of Paragon's Call, at least for this episode, is General Ratanish, a large, strong, and brutish Goliath. Obviously, he is just a hired thug, a killer, but also someone who stands to be given a significant amount of power in the city of Drusar very soon. I have a feeling that he will be particularly dangerous, at least in the coming sessions. Someone who I don't think is going to be particularly dangerous, though, is Grizz Alakratos, the headmaster of the Alliance of Allsight. This goblin scholar just brought a smile to my face as the group interacted with them, and we're definitely going to be getting more of him because his friend, Ashit Dayal, is part of the Gorgon Eye. Now, for those of you who have forgotten, the Gorgon Eye are the subsect of werewolves who have embraced their curse, I suppose, and are, I guess, forces for quote-unquote good. They live in Marquette, according to the lore, probably in the jungles of Ashanador, and they have sworn not to pass their lycanthropy to others. So Matt is definitely laying that werewolf plot thread. And then finally, maybe the biggest surprise of this entire episode, Preston Drodelon, the Lord of the Crossroads, is introduced. And for those of you guys who have not watched Critical Role Season 1, essentially, Grog, Travis's old character, got a deck of many things, led to a whole bunch of issues and 2 one-shots. But one fateful session, he had a random individual pull a card from the deck of many things. This card was the Wish card, and he wished to be a lord. And that is how Preston, Lord of the Quadroads, came to be. And I encourage you to go back through this episode and watch as all the cast's faces just light up at realizing who this person is. I think Travis knows right away, and Marisha picks up on it pretty quickly too. Laura then gets a text from Travis, and it just spirals through the entire table. But with all the characters set up, let's talk about the big events in tonight's session. Gavis addresses the crowd, and he gives a fine speech, but there are definitely rumblings of discontent underneath. People no longer feel safe in Drusar, and it feels like the Paragon's Call are rising. General Ratanish stares down Gavis, who I think kind of fizzles out in the moment. He's a lot of show, but from my read on the character, he doesn't have a ton of substance behind it. He is a flashy mouthpiece for the Quorum, nothing more. The reason why he can talk the way he talks and do the things that he does is because the Quorum supports him. It's because the people support him, really. It's because they believe in the Quorum and the Quorum's power. But it's now clear to see that the belief in the Quorum is dying, and quickly. Obviously, of course, by the workings of Armand, the Nightmare King, and whoever else is a part of the circle. But now let's talk about Cyrus Wyvernwind and his connection with Amoth Cade and Armand. This is what we know. Cyrus is there to expunge his debts. How's he doing this? Well, he apparently sought aid from Amoth Cade and probably by proxy Armand Treshy. And it is clear that they're wiping out Cyrus's debt that night. Armand goes and immediately starts talking to Gianna Hexam. There's no doubt in my mind that there's one purpose of this: to get rid of Cyrus's debt to Gianna. But as we all know, this is stupid. Cyrus is just trading one person who is in control of his life for another person who's in control of his life. Because definitely Armand wants something, and I think we can all take a guess at what he wants. Probably to corrupt Cyrus in a similar way that Duggar was corrupted. Because let's face it, the Nightmare King is looking for Mahan children, looking for nobility, looking for people to influence, to control the city of Drusar. And probably not just Drusar, but all of Marquette, even the world. And it is a small price to pay for House Treshy to pay off the debt and get Cyrus under their control. So I definitely think that Cyrus is being built up to be a villain in the future. Now though, let's talk about the Dance of the Crossroads and possibly the greatest clusterfuck ever assembled in the history of Critical Role. Despite all the group's planning, despite everything that they've done, it all goes up in smoke instantly. It was the perfect storm of completely fucked antics and plans and low rolls. Fern in the Dance of the Crossroads eventually gets to dance with Armand. She reveals that she is Fae, and Armand is very, very direct with her. There's this scary intensity to the dwarf. Imogen is able to get off a detect thoughts on him, and he notes that he's been seeing a lot of Fae as of late, so he's definitely connected to the Nightmare King and now is even more suspicious of Fern. Ashley is obviously a bit overwhelmed in this moment, and honestly, who wouldn't be? This is a huge moment, and she has just literal seconds to decide what she's going to do. Her actions could impact the campaign for dozens of sessions moving forward. But eventually, she comes to the conclusion that she's got to just rip that ring off. And she gets an absolutely clutch check. Fern pops the ring off with some effort. Armand 100% notices. And then everything fucking goes to shit. The ring is dropped. I was just sitting there flabbergasted. I did not know what the fuck was happening. The ring is booted. At this point, Laura tries to engage leadership mode. And I know that it was obvious that she was really stressed in that situation, but I'm also glad that Matt was able to almost handle Laura, because even the best players sometimes overstep their boundaries. And from watching the session, I think it was really clear that Matt was trying to rein Laura in a little bit, and the group also as well were trying to make sure that everyone had their time in the spotlight and everyone could act with a sense of free will and that they weren't being micromanaged. But again, happens to everybody. Sometimes you're so caught up in the moment that you forget, yeah, it is just a game. And then Robbie runs in to save the day. Dorian, or Bronte as he's presenting himself, goes forward and presents the ring and gets two just terrible rolls. It was a great attempt, Robbie, but sometimes the dice just don't go in your favor. But now Laura comes back into the fray and begins trying to quote-unquote search for the ring. And in one of the closest rolls I've ever seen, Dorian throws the tracking ring to Fern. It's very visible, but I think Ashley role plays out of it great. And some people might say, oh, Matt was giving them breaks, but that's not how I see it. See, when I DM, like if I'm DMing a stealth mission, there are different levels of failure, because I personally don't believe that one bad roll should be the end of an opportunity and attempt. We want progressive challenge, progressive danger. And so yes, despite the group rolling low a number of times, Matt never just gives them anything. He's constantly amping up the tension. Because look, here's a DM secret. Instantly failing anything when you're a player sucks. It's not fun and Matt is trying to run a fun game. He still gave consequences, but it just didn't lead to complete and utter failure. Because here's the thing, the roles and the plans that the players were doing, while chaotic, they weren't stupid. They weren't doing things with reckless abandon, and you want to reward that effort. Sometimes the die rolls just don't go your way. And yeah, eventually they probably would have lost if they kept on rolling terribly. But they rolled well enough and they role-played their way to good situations where that didn't become an issue or a factor. So I'm completely okay with Matt's handling of the situation. And eventually the party gets the tracking ring into the hands of Lord Armand Treshy, thus concluding one of the greatest clusterfucks in Critical Role history. But there are still more things we have to talk about, at least with this session. Something that very quickly piqued my interest is Laudna discovering a symbol of the Dusk Maven or the Raven Queen on Paragon's call on Lord Britannish. And look, I'm going to be very honest, I don't believe for a second that these people are followers of the Raven Queen. I think that they believe that they are, but I don't think that they are Raven Queen. We'll see what powers are actually behind it, but I think it's more eldritch in nature. And then Travis full sends once again. And once again, this is why Travis is one of my favorite role players. He takes risks. I love that he throws himself forward into these dangerous situations to progress the story and to be heroic. So he sneaks in, barely past the guards, and unknowingly Cyrus Wyvernwind and goes to see what Lady Emoth is up to. The first time he follows Emoth and opens the door to the room that they're in, he is invisible, and as he's in the doorway, a moth comes forward with incredible speed, sweating, and has an off smell, a moldy, earthy smell, similar to the smell of Duggar and Duggar's house. Emoth closes the door, and eventually Chetney comes back around to try to sneak in again. Emoth and Cyrus are not in the bathroom like they stated, so he goes back and checks the room. So not only does Travis go alone once, but he sees the danger and he goes back alone twice. And then we get a huge reveal. There are 4 shade creepers in the room, just basically ransacking the place. Then we see Emoth in her true form. Black eyes, blackened veins, pale skin, this aberrant shifting form, it all aligns with Duggar. There's a thicker mucousy pattern. Arms are a bit longer. She is full ass corrupted. And now we have to ask, what were they doing there? Well, I think that there is a reason why these aberrant creatures, why the Nightmare King and Armand are taking members from the Hubot Corsairs, why they're here that night. They're trying to collect the identities of the Chandri Quorum. Because if they corrupt the Chandri Quorum, then they control Drusar. It seems pretty simple. And they don't even need to get all of the quorum, they just need to get enough members to have a majority or an influence, a sway. And if Armand is already part of the Chandri Quorum, that's dangerous, and personally for me, I'm assuming that Gianna Hexam and Ella Loomis are also a part of the quorum. The party might find themselves running out of allies, running out of like humans, of people to work with, because they're all just gonna get corrupted. But now let's talk about the final biggest part of the session, the episode, which is the fight. So Vali Detrana is on the dance floor and they see Ashton in the Nightmare King mask. Vali goes to General Ratanish and Ratanish approaches Ashton. It's a tense conversation, but eventually Ratanish's manners fade away and he rips the mask off of Ashton's face. And you know what? Ashton does not blink. He slaps Ratanish, and Ratanish slaps him back. This escalates until eventually they agree to step outside and basically have an old school, old-fashioned fist fight. Most of the people at the ball then begin to follow them as they're watching the night's entertainment. Can Ashton win? I don't think so. I think he's pretty much fully outgunned by Ratanish. It feels similar to the Grog Kevdak fight. But oh boy, if Ashton can win, this would be huge. We've questioned if his subclass is overpowered. Let's see what it can really do. And honestly, my dream personally is for this to turn into an all-out brawl between the party and Paragon's Call. Because honestly, let's think about it. If the party can beat Paragon's Call and prove that they are the superior group, Perhaps they will be put in charge of the city of Drusar. Perhaps they will be put in charge of protection and can finally have enough sway to begin hunting down these Shade Creepers, hunt down the Nightmare King, and stop whatever plot is about to impact this city. Because Lord knows something is coming. And now, perhaps we've been left on the biggest cliffhanger yet. This Thursday, we're not only getting the conclusion of The Legend of Vox Machina, but we are also getting perhaps the most important fight, the most important moments of the campaign so far. And then after this, we have a 2-week break, so whatever happens, I'm feeling like it's gonna be good. And if you need more content to hold you over between now and the next episode of Critical Role, let me recommend this video right here, and thank you for entering the dungeon.